Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into the Soviet Gulag system with me today? We're going to be using Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago as our guide.
Oh, an excellent choice. A truly harrowing first-hand account of this vast network of forced labor camps.
It is, and it's a heavy topic, no way around that, but such an important one.
Absolutely.
And we really want to understand how this system operated. What was the ideology, the thinking behind it, and of course the immense suffering inflicted upon its prisoners.
Well, Solzhenitsyn's account is so valuable because he doesn't just describe the brutality, he really gets into the mechanics of the system itself, almost like he's dissecting it. You know?
And right from the start, he talks about this science of arrest, and I think that word science is so chilling because it implies such a deliberate, a calculated method to the terror.
It's not hyperbole at all. The system was designed for control, from the very ways they arrested people to how they silenced anyone who might speak out against it.
And he gives these vivid examples, people being arrested from their hospital beds, mid-surgery, or by seemingly ordinary people like a meter reader or a railway conductor who suddenly flash an ID and boom, your life's over.
The intended effect of that, to instill complete fear and helplessness in the population. Imagine always looking over your shoulder, never knowing if the person next to you is an informant.
Makes trust impossible.
Exactly. Crushes any chance of collective resistance.
And that idea that the system was targeting ordinary people. I think it's surprising for some to learn that the Gulag wasn't only for political prisoners, right?
The mass deportations of peasants in 1929 and 1930 are a tragic example. Millions sent to the Gulag, and this event is barely documented because those victims were just silenced so effectively.
And then you have things like the 7-8 law, where people receive 10-year sentences for stealing something as insignificant as a spool of thread.
It's about control, controlling every aspect of life. Even the smallest act could be deemed a threat, a way to keep the population constantly on edge.
And after the war, the 4/6 decree extending sentences even further for these minor offenses
Demonstrates how the regime was tightening its grip, turning even minor infractions into serious crimes punishable by years in the Gulag.
Once arrested, what happened next? I imagine the pressure to confess was immense, especially given what we know about the arrests themselves.
Solzhenitsyn describes a relentless pressure. They used planted informers, threats, sleep deprivation in places like Butyrki prison to just break people down.
It's hard to even imagine that psychological toll.
Absolutely. And what's disturbing is that many high-ranking Bolsheviks, who had been ruthlessly persecuting others, showed incredible cowardice when they themselves were arrested during the purges.
Why do you think that is?
I think it reveals the dehumanizing nature of the system. It turned even those in power into instruments of repression, and when the tables turned, they were terrified.
So this twisted cycle of fear and repression just feeding on itself.
Exactly.
And the actual journey to the camps, I can't imagine that was anything but brutal as well.
Picture this. Herded into these overcrowded, unsanitary train cars, stripped of your possessions, your dignity, headed to an unknown destination.
Dehumanizing even before reaching the camps.
And the system extended beyond the camps themselves. Transit prisons, essentially holding pens, existed in every town.
Every town.
A way station on the road to the Gulag, the system's reach was vast.
And what were the conditions like in these transit prisons?
Well, Solzhenitsyn describes Kotlas Transit Prison, overcrowding, exposure to the elements, a shockingly high death rate.
It's just a glimpse into the scale of suffering inherent to the Gulag.
Professor Kurganov, who dedicated his life to studying the Gulag, estimated that 66 million people died due to internal repression in the Soviet Union up to 1959.
That number is difficult to even grasp.
It is.
Solzhenitsyn talks about Solovki, originally a monastery on an island in the White Sea, being the first prototype of this forced labor camp system. What happened there?
A place of spiritual contemplation transformed into a site of cruelty. Monks were expelled except for a few whose skills were deemed useful.
Even in their brutality, there was a pragmatism.
A desire to exploit any possible labor, yeah.
And for the prisoners, what were the conditions like in Solovki?
Brutal. They endured exposure to the elements, back-breaking labor, punishments designed to break their spirits. Solzhenitsyn even describes prisoners being tied naked to trees, left to be devoured by mosquitoes.
It's just chilling.
It is.
Was there any specific ideology behind this level of cruelty?
Under Naftali Frankel, who headed the Gulag, a new philosophy emerged. Extract maximum labor in the shortest possible time, regardless of human cost.
So efficiency, turning human beings into tools for the state.
This philosophy became the guiding principle of the entire Gulag system, unfortunately.
And they actually used the Gulag as a showcase, like with the White Sea-Baltic Canal, this massive project built entirely with forced labor.
They touted it as a symbol of socialist progress.
Oh, wow, I've heard of that.
The reality, starvation, disease, overwork, death.
It's incredible how they could twist reality like that.
A veteran named Witkowski describes seeing corpses just left frozen in the snow after each workday on the canal, the disregard for human life.
And they separated families, sent people to climates they were completely unprepared for.
All part of a system designed to crush the human spirit.
Speaking of harsh climates, Kolyma, this region in the Far East, known as the Pole of Cold, notorious even within the Gulag system.
The pinnacle of the Gulag's cruelty, prisoners subjected to starvation, beatings, attacks by dogs, denied basic warmth in sub-zero temperatures.
Why would they choose such a brutal, remote location?
Resource extraction, no matter the cost, they were willing to sacrifice countless lives to get what they wanted from the land, even in the most inhospitable environments. That pursuit of resources, it really sums up the Gulag, not just punishment, but control. Exploitation on a massive scale.
And Solzhenitsyn, he really captures the day-to-day, even the details about the living conditions.
Overcrowded barracks, lack of hygiene, clothing completely inadequate for the climate, disease was rampant, scurvy, pellagra dystrophy, incredibly common.
He even talks about the exploitation of women in the camps. It adds another layer of horror to this already horrific system.
Degrading inspections, often forced into relationships with trustees, just to obtain basic necessities.
Imagine the psychological toll of that, where survival depends on those kinds of compromises.
It's just unimaginable.
Did Solzhenitsyn offer any insight into the psychological impact of the Gulag on the prisoners?
Constant fear, loss of connection, utter degradation, it wore down the psyche. Many succumbed to despair. He even mentions this thief's law, an unwritten code of conduct among the criminal element.
Thief's law? I've never heard of that.
It's a complex element, this code, with its emphasis on strength and self-preservation, often clashed with the values of the political prisoners.
Creating a hierarchy within the camps, almost as brutal as the system itself?
You could say that.
How did that play out in practice?
Solzhenitsyn describes how the thieves, often hardened criminals, held a strange respect for the politicals, admired their ideals, their refusal to compromise, but that didn't stop them from exploiting others. Their code often led to violence, exploitation within the camps.
It's amazing how Solzhenitsyn captures these nuances within such a brutal system. It's not just black and white.
Shades of gray everywhere.
He does a good job of highlighting the moral compromises people had to make just to survive.
It wasn't simple, right and wrong. The Gulag was designed to force people into impossible situations, their values versus their lives.
And the role of ideology. How did the Soviet authorities justify the Gulag? It seems like a system that'd be hard to defend.
They created an elaborate ideological framework, twisted language, manipulated truth, words were redefined, history rewritten, propaganda to control the narrative.
The Gulag wasn't a place of suffering and death. It was a place for re-education.
Where enemies of the people could be reformed through hard work.
It's almost Orwellian.
Absolutely. He calls out the hypocrisy. A workers' paradise while enslaving millions, forced labor was a crucial part of their economy.
It's a sobering thought. Did he offer any insights into how the Gulag came to be? How could a society create something so horrific?
He argues that the Gulag wasn't just a mistake, a deviation. It was a consequence of the Soviet system itself, its totalitarian nature, disregard for individual rights.
That's a challenging point. And who were the people who kept it running? Was it just Stalin and a few at the top?
While Stalin was the architect, the system wouldn't have functioned without the participation of countless others. Guards, informers, bureaucrats.
So ordinary people were complicit.
He describes this culture of fear and obedience. People were afraid to speak out, even when they knew it was wrong. Dissent could mean imprisonment, torture, death for you and your family.
So many people chose to look the other way.
Or even actively participate.
It's a reminder that we can't just blame a few bad actors.
Evil systems thrive on the complicity of many.
The Gulag wasn't just about physical brutality. It was about crushing the human spirit, breaking down community, solidarity.
Separation of families, suspicion, competition for basic necessities, turning people against each other.
So they didn't just want to control their bodies, they wanted to control their minds.
Absolutely. But amidst all the horror, he also writes about incredible acts of resilience, finding ways to maintain their dignity, even experience joy.
How did they resist? How do they maintain their humanity in such dehumanizing conditions?
Secret seminars to discuss philosophy, science, even on the brink of death. Acts of intellectual and spiritual resistance. The power of the human mind.
That's incredible.
It is.
And compassion, kindness. Did he witness any of that?
Sharing meager rations with the weaker, risking their own lives to help others, those acts of compassion show that even in the darkest places, decency can endure.
It's almost like those acts were a way of fighting back, reclaiming their humanity.
He argues that they were essential for survival, physically and spiritually. It wasn't just about staying alive, it was about maintaining one's sense of self.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
Did Solzhenitsyn discuss the aftermath, what happened to the prisoners once they were released?
That's a crucial part, often overlooked. The trauma didn't end at the camp gates. They were often dumped back into society with little support, facing discrimination, suspicion, alienation.
Punished twice, first for the alleged crimes, then for surviving.
You could say that.
Did the Soviet authorities acknowledge what had happened, or did they try to cover it up?
They tried to erase it from history, silence former prisoners. They understood the power of these stories, threatened them with further imprisonment or exile.
The repression continued.
It did.
It's incredible that we know anything, given these attempts to silence them. How did Solzhenitsyn manage to write and publish the Gulag Archipelago? Wasn't he afraid?
It's a testament to his courage, his determination. He risked his life to expose the system. His book shattered the silence, contributed to the downfall of the regime.
That's an incredible legacy.
It is.
What are some key takeaways? What can we learn?
It's a warning about totalitarianism, the fragility of freedom, vigilance in the face of any system that seeks to dehumanize, control its people.
We must be aware, critical of what we hear, what we read, question the narrative, seek out alternative perspectives.
Absolutely.
And the impact on the survivors. How do they cope with the trauma?
Solzhenitsyn talks about memory, bearing witness. He argues that forgetting condemns us to repeat it.
How did this idea of memory play out?
He documented their experiences, gave voice to their suffering, ensuring their stories wouldn't be forgotten. Remembering, no matter how painful, is essential.
So his work is a memorial, but also a warning.
A reminder that we must never forget.
And that we must be vigilant in defending our freedoms against any form of tyranny.
Exactly. The lessons of the Gulag are universal, timeless, reminding us of the potential for darkness within all human societies.
It's incredible, right, how Solzhenitsyn's work, it's not just exposing the horrors of the Gulag, but it's like a warning for us today.
Yeah, he really argues that the tactics they used, twisting language, manipulating the truth, silencing dissent, it's not unique to the Soviet Union or that time.
You're right, it's like a blueprint for any regime that wants to control people. He describes how words lose their meaning, history rewritten, propaganda becomes reality.
And he warns us, these dangers are always there, lurking. Any society can fall prey if we're not careful.
It's chilling. It really is. A reminder to be critical of what we hear, what we read, to question things, look for different perspectives.
Absolutely. Always question the narrative.
He talks about this culture of fear, too, that went way beyond the camps themselves. How did that fear, how did it shape everyday life for people?
Well, imagine anyone could be an informer, an enemy of the state. People were afraid to talk, afraid to trust their neighbors, even afraid to think freely.
So the Gulag, it cast this long shadow over even for those who weren't imprisoned. It's like a system designed to just break the human spirit on a massive scale.
That's exactly what it was. But even with that, Solzhenitsyn, he points out the incredible resilience of people, finding meaning in suffering, holding on to their humanity.
That's inspiring. To hear that even in that darkness, there was hope, it makes his work even more powerful, you know?
It's a testament to the human spirit, finding light in the darkest places, and a reminder that we all have the capacity for good and evil under any circumstance.
Well, this has been a heavy, heavy deep dive, but so important. Thank you for helping us understand this difficult topic.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us. While the Gulag is gone, its legacy, it's a reminder of our capacity for cruelty, but also for incredible resilience, the importance of protecting our freedoms.
We encourage you to keep learning, to hear the stories of those who suffered and perished in the Gulag, and to think about the lessons it holds for us today. It's a part of history we can never forget.